just so we have a record of this. And as Mike said, this will be distributed out to everybody per usual tomorrow, along with being posted on the coaches resource page as soon as YouTube can get it uploaded there. That sometimes takes a while, but you will have that tomorrow. So tonight, you're hopefully in the right place if you're here for the athletics preseason webinar. On the call tonight, it's myself, the sports director for athletics, Ron Freeman, one of our management team members who runs the track and field at Burdick Field, or Johnny Unitas Stadium, actually. Burdick Field is Thursday night with Bocce. Excuse me there. Mike Sarnowski, VP of Sports, and then Steve Bennett, Senior Director of Community Sports and Competition. If you have any questions as we go through here, please feel free to put them in chat. Steve or I will try to monitor that as we go through here and address all of them before we close out tonight. So looking over a quick review or overview of what we'll be talking about tonight. Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to hopefully the norm again this year. Happy to see everybody on this call, and thank you to many of you who have already reached out this year. Look forward to working with you again. We'll talk about, first off, return to activities, some slides that Mike will go through. We'll talk about some paperwork, when some deadlines are that need to be jotted down, just so we're all following those and making sure that everything's in on time so we can focus on the part that we love. We'll talk about the summer games dates and some brief details pertaining to that. There's some coaches trainings, multiple opportunities there that you can take advantage of to improve your skills as a coach. We'll talk about some resources that are offered to you if you're not familiar with those or where to access them. We'll go over the list of events that will be offered at summer games, talk about some qualifying competitions and how to approach those once you're aware that you may be hosting one or one that you may be interested in attending. Ron Freeman will be covering the athletic sports review. Thankfully, we have some sports specialists on the webinar tonight to cover all of those. And then there is a resource section, as we always include at the end, that you can look through at your own convenience, or if you have any questions, it's a great reference point to look through as it contains a lot of information. So at this point, I will pass it over to you, Mike.
Okay, great, thanks. It's great to see so many familiar faces as well as a fair number of new faces. So welcome to all. We're really looking forward to having something close to a typical season. We are still operating in a pandemic, and we need to acknowledge that, but things are numbers-wise looking better than they have in a long while. So and they're much better. Things are much easier to operate in than they were a year or even 2 years or even a year ago. So with that, again, we're looking at the trends, and I don't want to jinx it, but you can see the chart there is showing our key metric that we use to determine how we need to operate, and that is the number of cases per 100,000 people over a 7-day average. And when we're in that green section that's there, for the most part, with a couple exceptions, it's operating pretty close to normal or typical or pre-pandemic. And then as we go up, it'll vary some. So right now, as of today, we've had 21 consecutive days in green and continuing to drop down. So again, there's no guarantee. We're keeping our fingers crossed a bit here, but we are optimistic that we'll be able to maintain this going forward. Also, as we're looking at things here and looking at how we need to operate, we, for the most part, look at it from a statewide standpoint rather than county by county. So if the state is at a certain level, everybody is. The only exception to that, which, knock on wood, hopefully we won't be anywhere near this, is if a county has more than 50 cases per 100,000. No one is anywhere near that. I think every county in the state is below 10. But season is several months long, and one never knows what can happen. So Ryan, why don't you go to the next slide? I ask you to ignore that chart up above. We're including it because this is a standard slide that we share. you don't need to worry about trying to figure that out. I'll highlight the couple pieces that need to be highlighted there. That's something for your area leaders and such. But it's too confusing to try to explain it. Bottom line is we've got 4 different categories now of we operate in the low risk category, and which is the green, which is where we're at right now. We follow the local regulations, and there's some Special Olympics precautions that are added. When we get into the moderate, with a slightly higher incidence, again, same thing. There's a couple more precautions that need to be added on. When we get to the significant risk, and that's 15 or more cases per 100,000, there are some size restrictions for things indoors. But for the most part, local regulations for outdoor stuff, which is what track for the most part, at least how we do it, is operated. And then there's a new category for those who have been with us for a while, that's very high risk, and that's when the incidence is above 100. And again, knock on wood, we don't anticipate being anywhere near that. But we need to be prepared and such. If there is a significant change in the level that we're operating under, we will certainly get that information out. If you have any question, I think it's on one of these slides coming up. We update and monitor the level that we're at on a daily basis. And on the coach resource page, and if you're not familiar with that, I think Ryan will touch on that later. The current status is posted there, as well as if there are any counties that are operating at a different level. There aren't any at this point, haven't been for several weeks. So we're optimistic. But Ryan, why don't you go to the next? And this, and again, you'll get all this. I'm just going to summarize here. I could sit here and read it for you, but I don't think that's anybody's. I know I have just such a beautiful and soothing voice, but don't think that's necessary. So thank you, Kathy, for your endorsement there. So as far as vaccinations go across the board, and we'll touch on vaccinations a bit in the next 2 slides. In some cases, it's required for things. We'll come back to that. For when we're in green, as far as screening goes, there's no screening that's necessary. When we get into the moderates, there's a verbal screening. And then if we do get into the orange, it includes temperature checks. For masking, this is a change. Across the board, we follow local regulations now. So that is a little different from what, excuse me, had been the case even, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. There was an update of the protocol that we got from Special Olympics International, and that was part of it. So masking, we follow the local restrictions across the board. As it is right now, at least for the state of Maryland, there are no mask restrictions, but look at your individual things. Should also point out, when it comes to masking and a couple of these other things here, you also need to know what your facility is requiring. And I'll use as an example. We had, I think some of you were there, we had a fantastic basketball tournament at St. Mary's College on Sunday, went really well. They had a requirement that everyone, including spectators who came in, had to be vaccinated. That wasn't a protocol or a requirement that we had at that point, given the level that we were at, but they did. And so we had to enforce that because that was the only way to utilize the facility. So make sure to check what your facility requirements are. It can vary. I know a lot of you are using schools and so on, but just be sure to check that out. But so it could vary from what it says there about local restrictions for masking. But again, know what you have there. As far as distancing, Ryan, can you go back, please? Thanks. Excuse me. As far as distancing, for the low risk, we want to encourage it outside of sports competition, but it's not absolutely required. Inside of sport, across the board, distancing is not required. Hard to do a relay with having to stay 6 feet apart. So, but when we get into the yellow, the moderate risk or the significant risk, it is required outside of the competition. Again, being optimistic, we hopefully won't have to deal with that. For spectators, they are permitted in most cases, depending upon a couple different factors. It may be that we have to either keep them separated from the group or from the delegations, or have to check their vaccination status and only allow in those who are fully vaccinated. At this point in time, unless the facility requires it, that is not a requirement. There is no free spectators, so on down the line. They can't go where the delegations are necessarily. That's even before the pandemic, that was a restriction, or there were some limitations on that. But as of now, there's no restrictions and such, unless, like I mentioned, with yesterday's basketball tour, I'm sorry, Sunday's basketball tournament rather, there was a restriction from the local facility there. Transportation, basically, if you're sharing transportation that's provided by Special Olympics, folks should be wearing masks in the car unless everybody's vaccinated. And then accommodations. So key thing here, because there is no vaccination requirement to participate in athletics for Special Olympics. There is, however, if anyone is coming to either summer games or any other event where they are staying overnight accommodations are only permitted or only available to individuals who are fully vaccinated. So as you may have heard, like I say, with the vaccination status previously for track, it's not required. There is that nuance if you are staying overnight. So Ryan, why don't we go to the next slide? And this, again, I'm not going to read through the whole thing here, but just in a summary, we are still operating under the definition of full vaccination as having essentially completed that initial regimen of shots. If you're got either the Moderna or Pfizer, it's 2 weeks after you've completed your second dose. If you have the Johnson & Johnson or a Janssen, it's 2 weeks after the single dose that you have. We are tracking if people get boosters, and we certainly do want to have that sent in to us, but that is not a requirement here to be counted as fully vaccinated. So again, and we'll talk on the next slide about the sports that require vaccination. As far if you are offering a sport that does not require a vaccination, your area program cannot then impose a vaccination requirement on top of that. And then lastly, again, just to repeat about the overnight accommodations, and that applies, that vaccination requirement for overnight, or in any case where vaccination is required, applies to everybody in that delegation, or that sport portion of the delegation, if you will. So so anyhow, why don't we go to the next slide, which has kind of the breakout. So this is a listing of the requirements for all the different sports that Special Olympics offers, both locally popular as well as state level. The ones that are have like a green highlight are the ones associated with summer games. So for athletics and bocce, it is not required to be fully vaccinated. And also for softball skills, it is not required. However, for cheerleading, softball team, and swimming, it is required for anyone who is going to any activity that involves more than one area or more than one county. Not going to go into that here because that doesn't apply to track. We'll spend time on that with our friends in softball and cheerleading later on in this whole series. But again, this is what's in terms of competing. So this would apply to your day of at summer games, or also just going to any other competition that you may be attending, whatever. Vaccination is not required unless the facility requires it, or unless things change significantly, which is always possible. But again, we're optimistic that that won't be happening. But if they are going to stay overnight, then that is required. Okay. And then, so actually, before we go to that, just wanted to check any questions on any of the protocol. Again, things have been simplified significantly. I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail of what's and ifs. If we get to that point, we will continue with that. Your area leaders are your best resource on this stuff. They have been living with this and really making things happen for the last 2 years. There, but does anybody have any immediate question? You can just, if you raise your hand, looks like Pam has one.
Yeah, go ahead, Pam.
Pam, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Oh, while we wait for Pam, David, if you have a question, go ahead.
Just a question that if both coaches show up with or cannot show up due to say they both have COVID for any reason, whether it's the state games and or a qualifier, will they disallow the team to compete, or will they let the volunteers maybe run the team?
If we would do what we can to safely allow participation is the best answer to that I can give you. So if you start dealing with that kind of a situation and you don't have a third coach, you said two, so to handle that, we'll see what we can do to help you with that. I would think in most cases we can probably, I mean, that's not something you plan for, and we certainly don't want to impose that. And we are working, even though things are looking better, we are still working in a pandemic. So we'll I can't make you an absolute promise, but we will do what we can to make this happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, Pam, if you do get your audio problem or challenge fixed, we'll come back to you and such. So Ryan, why don't we go to the next slide?
And Mike, sorry, just one thing I just want to just reemphasize is that if there are individuals, as Mike said, they're staying overnight for summer games, make sure you have your vaccinations, and you can work with your area leadership to get that in place. But as we've had to do several events where vaccinations are required, please get those in early so it's not a scramble at the last minute. So thank you.
Yeah, and when we look at the deadlines and stuff, vaccinations fit right in with the requirements on those deadlines. And then Kathy asked about with the CDC switching a metric there. At this point in time, we need to follow the one that Special Olympics is operating under, and that has not changed. So if that does change, we'll assess that at that point. Whether we would do it immediately or wait until the next season would be something we decide at that time. But for now, we are sticking with this. This, unrelated to COVID, other than the fact that it has shut down most programs for 2 years or more, was a really strong suggestion that came from a couple parents of some athletes who are new to Special Olympics and suggested that we suggest this. And that is, this is a re-entry process for everybody. And actually, even if we weren't in COVID, we would suggest doing this too. So at your first few practices, be sure to have some opportunity for athletes, partners, everybody to introduce themselves and potentially have some type of an icebreaker or other activity where they can get to know each other. That could potentially be done while they're doing their stretches and such, but for particularly for athletes who are new to your program, getting integrated and getting to know folks and such can be a little challenging, and this is a nice way to do that. I think a lot of programs, I know the track program that Joyce and I coordinate, that's the first thing we do at the first session and do it all during our warm-ups and such to get everybody to know each other. I'm sure a lot of programs do that, but if you aren't, see about doing that. Also, if folks are the returning participants, I got to tell you, on Sunday, again, I saw lots of athletes who I've known for a lot of years, and I did not recognize them initially because I hadn't seen them for a while. So even for folks who are returning, giving them that opportunity to reintroduce themselves or to get to know folks again, it just kind of serves as a nice reentry process. And then again, this could be the very first activity that people have had for more than 2 years, and just kind of appreciate that. So build that in, make that as comfortable for people to get back into the swing of things. David?
Sorry, you were mentioning about the overnights and stuff, but with the Naval Academy and the qualifier down there and being I guess a government entity, do you know anything about, for us to visit there, will we have to be vaccinated or will we find out?
So yes, we found out this morning, it was mentioned for that particular competition. Everything on the Naval Academy grounds will require that people be fully vaccinated.
Wow.
So,
So we
the-
need to require then to ask our
if you are, yes, if you are planning to have folks attend that, they will need to have provided prior to that event, by whatever the deadlines may be, their proof of vaccination. It's going to vary again by facility. So,
Does fully vaccinated mean the booster as well for this event?
no, again, the fully vaccinated is, unless there's some odd definition or different definition that the Naval Academy has, I have not heard that they are requiring that. But it is with the initial regimen of either 2 weeks after 2 shots for the Pfizer and Moderna, or 2 weeks after the 1 shot. So if that changes, we'll certainly share that. So I don't have any other information on that at this point.
We should check because I work for federal government and there's certain classes that must have the booster.
Jeff Abel and Katie Sheeman, I'm sure, are on top of that. So then they're also checking for the other portion that's going to be held at the Annapolis Y as to what's required there and such. So because Naval Academy personnel will be there. So anyhow, in respect for people's time, we can move along and then maybe save some of these questions. If there are more at the end, I'll be here the whole time. So just as a reminder, as I said before, work with your area leadership. They know what's going on, not just for COVID, but for pretty much everything. And they're making a lot of the key decisions. So as we're looking at some of the things that are required coming up in terms of forms and such, they're the ones who are going to know that. Let's see. So Kathy, I'll come back to your question after a bit. Go ahead to the next slide. So what's required? This should not be a surprise for anybody. But again, looking at for athletes, it's a medical, and there is a new form called, or well, it's now almost, it's over a year old now, but the communicable disease waiver. Everyone, even the day of volunteers that you don't have to deal with, but the day of volunteers have to complete a CDW. For unified partners and general volunteers, they need their volunteer application, protected behaviors, and communicable disease waivers, and so on down the line. And these all need to be valid through June, the state championship, which is June 19th. And they need to have them before they start training. Back up if you could, Ryan, sorry. Ryan, could you back up?
Yeah, I'm trying to. I did not
Okay.
click the button, so maybe it has a mind of its own all of a sudden.
Your computer is possessed. So, but anyhow, go through that, and then the red box, and again, you'll get this later, is just reminders about vaccination stuff. Okay.
1 minute, please.
Okay. I'll just keep talking. Let's see, really what's in that box is just a repeat of what I had said before. So not a big deal with that. But the key thing with this in terms of any of these forms and how they need to be submitted, work with your area to get them in. Each area typically has an individual who's designated to get that stuff in. In fact, your area probably already knows who is missing what or who needs to get what based on at least who's participated in the past. They are the resource. Be sure to be talking with them. And then as Ryan saw on the next slide, if you could go, just a reminder again, and this should be no surprise, but no one, period, no one can participate at all in Special Olympics as far as an athlete goes without their current medical and CDW. The volunteer not without their current volunteer application and all the other particular certifications based on their rule. And there are absolutely no exceptions to this. There is no grace period. There is no 2 weeks. Oh, get it to us next time. Come on out and run track. It has to be in before they start. And again, I know that can be tough. As I mentioned, I coach as well. We enforce this absolutely. And they just either need to sit or skip that practice. The key to that is getting in touch with people ahead of time and making sure that they know what that is. Your first practice, so you may get a bunch of people turning in some forms there that we're missing, and that's normal. But they cannot start without having that in place. And again, there is no exception whatsoever. Let's go to the next slide. So again, for those of you who've been around for a bit, this should look familiar. We have 3 different registration deadlines. All of these are involve submissions of either forms or information that you as a coach are not able to submit yourself. You're going to be going through somebody in your area to get it turned in. So the training registration deadline, and we need to have this in at Special Olympics Maryland's computer system by the end of April, April 29th. That's when you establish who is training in your program, who's involved with that, your athletes, your coaches, your unified partners, your other volunteers and such. As you note there, you should get that to your area leadership 1 to 2 weeks before. Key with that is talk to them ahead of time so you know when it is, what that date is that they need it. It's going to vary by area and really dependent upon the volunteers' availability. But that first date, that training registration date, establishes who's training in your program. You can certainly add people after that date, but they would not be eligible to participate in summer games after that point. You then have, I'm not going to go through all the little things that are there, but the date for missing forms, those all need to be into Special Olympics Maryland by May 9th. Again, work with your area leadership before that. It's essentially everything that all the forms that they need, all valid through June 19th, need to be sent in. As a repeat, they cannot start without having them, but there's a turnaround time between when you maybe as a coach receive it and then it gets to the area to be turned in, but work out with your area directors. And then a competition registration deadline, which is May 27th. That's when the events that your athletes are going to be in and so on down the line need to be submitted or into the system. And again, give your area folks an extra couple days or a couple weeks based on what their requirements may be. We may add an additional for track and for swimming, an opportunity to add more scores. So that we'll keep you posted on that. Usually, like if there's after you got everybody in, if you need to update your scores, we sometimes will give you an extra week on top of that, but we still need to have everybody who's registered by that date. Okay. And then Ryan, I have one last slide. Just as a reminder, hopefully everybody who's on this call got the email I sent out last Thursday that had kind of a summary of all the stuff that's there. But just as a reminder, summer games, not that the season is what's important, but summer games is a nice on top of it. Our way to culminate it is June 17th through 19th. That is a week later than has typically been the case. So be sure you're aware of that. Yes, we are aware that Sunday is Father's Day. And we are looking at appropriate ways to recognize that. But it will be at Towson. Ryan, sorry, we're not going to have it over at Burdick Field. We will, I think Ron would prefer it at United Stadium. And so, although Ron, if you'd rather, we can see what we can work out. And again, we're looking to operate summer games essentially very close to what it looked like pre-pandemic. And then there's just some the notes there. Track competition, opening ceremony would be Friday night, and track competition along with some other sports would be Saturday and Sunday. Okay. Tonight's not all about summer games, so but given the change in dates and such and all, we wanted to at least highlight that. That said, Ryan, I will turn it back to you and Ron and mute myself.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. I might not be able to hit the back button, but I can cover this content. So for our coaches trainings this year, we have 3. We have a new beginner coach training. That's for anybody with less than 2 years of Special Olympics coaches training. We'll talk about some coaching techniques that work best for our athletes. And it's kind of just a beginner course. There's nothing wrong with being a beginner, just some information about the sport. Next up, we have running your own meet. So that'll talk about all the equipment that you'll need, maybe some pointers. I would suggest that you bring to the table if you're a coach that has hosted one before, to kind of start a little conversation about what works well for your county. That one will be on March 30th. And then lastly, we have a master course that needs to be any coaches that have 5 or more years of experience. You can see the survey there, which is also posted online. It does not mean you're guaranteed to be in that course, but it will give us an idea of who has signed up there. Again, for each of these, we just want to be most respectful of your time. So pick the course that's best for you. And I guarantee that those 2-hour max sessions will be very beneficial and helpful to the athletes of your program. So on the coaches resource page, as Mike was talking a little bit earlier, and I'm sure many of you have seen, we have our main coaches resource page. That's where you can find consistently updated return to activity statuses if you're wondering where we stand there, along with resources regarding COVID. There's also a certification status update. I believe it's monthly. Correct me if I'm wrong, where you can check and see where your athletes, partners, coaches, and volunteers stand.
Weekly.
Weekly.
We're doing it weekly now.
Awesome.
God bless Dottie Rush.
Yes, she has been a huge help since she came on board here. And then links to applications, forms, and certifications. So if you're wondering where to complete your concussion certification, protective behaviors, anything like that, that main coaches resource page will have that. Under that same main page, we have 2 other main sections. One's pretty much a sports section, which would include the athletics coaches resource page. It will include the rules. It'll have the webinars when the next coach education opportunity is, along with how to sign up for each of those, so we get an indication of who's interested there. Along with the competitions, there is a section that has qualifiers or competitions. I forget exactly what it says. So when opportunities do arise, they will be listed there. And that'll be very detailed. You might see an email from me saying, here's an opportunity with some light information. That sanction form will have everything that you may want to know before signing up for an event. And then lastly, we have the coach education development page there at the bottom. That's coaches, trainings, transcripts, coach certification reports, and then other non-sport specific coach opportunities. So 2 different things here. First, you see the USA track and field book that has the rules. That is the main rule book. We do have our adaptation that you can also find on the resource page that I encourage you to keep with you. But it's great if you click on that link, you can pretty much, if you make it full screen, you can click through that whole book that has everything to do with attire, marshals, DQs, protests, a lot of information in that book, maybe more than you want to know. But very helpful if you're looking for an all-inclusive document there. And again, we do have our sport rules book up there. Also, the last update of that is from 2020, just so you're aware. That's not a mistype there. So qualifying opportunities, we were talking about the one in Annapolis earlier. Katie and I were speaking earlier on that. She's just trying to finalize a few details before we make that officially noticed out to everyone. But please make sure that once you get the information solidified on your end, that you submit that to me, just so we can put that out to everybody. And please fill that out in its entirety. Something to you might not seem important, but to me or everyone else, it is extremely important, including the max amount of people that can attend, et cetera there. So please just be diligent when you fill that out, and let's try to get these posted here as soon as we can. Something to touch on here, the current plan for, I believe it's each sport for summer games, is that each athlete must compete in a minimum of 2 qualifiers for summer games. One of those can be in-house though at this year. Please let me know how I can support you. I know that a few different people have let me know that they may be able to do something and that they said they might need help with divisioning or whatever. I am here to help you. Equipment needs, anything that you would need, please just include that on the bottom of that sanction form. There's a portion of the form for that. And I'll be happy to not only just assist you with the planning pieces up to the front end of it, but also being there if at all possible. Joyce raised her hand. Go ahead, Joyce.
Trying to unmute. Thank you. So there will not be a required track qualifier of any kind, then we can just pick one based on what we're just making sure that that hadn't changed or anything. Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else? All right. At this point, I will pass it over to one of the 2 specialists that are hosting tonight. And Ron, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. The events offered for this year's 2022 games, you can see listed here. When I saw this slide earlier, what caught my eye was the 4x25 relay shuttle. I suspect we don't have even very many areas who have 4 athletes in wheelchairs, but we can actually run this event. But so it's up there on the sheet. So if you have that, we'll offer it for you. But I mean, for as long as I've been doing summer games, we've not had this event in our schedule. Everything else, the 3 relays, the 1 relay, the 4x200 will be on the first day of competition, and the other 2 relays, the 4x1 and the 4x4, will be on day 2. Here listed at the very bottom right-hand side of this slide are the pentathlon events, and the rule change, and I think this is either still up for discussion or it's official. The Special Olympics rules for 2020 list the 800 meter run as the instead of the 400. The 800 has been substituted for the 400, and it is my understanding we're going to be running that in the pentathlon rather than the 400. And either Mike or Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
We'll consult with the coaches who have
Okay.
who are looking to do pentathlon as to which is best. It's a big
Okay.
jump to do. So.
Either way, if you do happen to look at the order of events identified in the sport rules, Special Olympic sport rules, just by nature of how we schedule our events, our order of events for the pentathlon will be the same order as those events are offered during our schedule, which is very likely going to be different from the order specified in the sports rules. Okay, next slide. Okay, as we've done in every year that we've actually had a full 2-day competition, athletes are permitted to enter 3 individual events plus 2 relays. Those relays can consist of the 4x2 on Saturday and either the 4x1 or the 4x4 on Sunday. Okay, the other 2 points aren't necessarily applicable to the event itself, but look for your qualifiers and get your athletes practiced in the events that you hope to have them entered into the games.
Yeah, the one point, actually, I'm sorry to jump in, Ron.
That's right.
If you are going to a qualifier or a competition that's being hosted by another county, they may not, for very good reason, be offering every event. It's very rare, quite frankly, other than a handful, to offer the high jump or anything longer than the 400 or whatever. And again, there's very good reasons for that. It's not them trying to slight anybody, but find out what they're offering so that you know what's available. And there may be, unfortunately, in some cases, there may be nothing for a given athlete, but just talk to them ahead of time.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, some exclusions. Standing long jump as a more fundamental jumping event. If you're entering the standing long jump, you may now also enter the long jump or the running long jump, as it was sometimes referred to. And standing long jump athletes may also not enter the high jump. Softball and tennis ball throws are exclusive from the shot put and the mini jab, and athletes can't enter both the softball and the tennis ball throw. Wheelchair events, fairly self-evident. Your athlete must be using a wheelchair to move around. Okay. Next slide. Another couple of exclusions. Athletes entered in events shorter than the 100 may not be running in events longer than 100. So if your athlete is running 25 or 50s, they can't be running also a 200 or a 400 or anything beyond that. Athletes in the 50 may run in the 100, which would allow them to run in the 4x100 relay as well. But your athlete needs to be able to run in the 100 in order to run in a relay. I'm going to leave, Dave will get you your question in a bit. I'm going to leave the slide. It's not specifically applicable to the event itself. Please read this in terms of entering your athletes for your delegations, percentage of your athletes in specific events. And again, for this and for this slide as well, the point is to move our athletes into events that are more challenging and appropriate for their level of ability. Exit criteria for softball throw and 50-meter race. I believe we've used the first column, the one on the left, the 20-meter and the 10-second rule. This is to, if we have athletes who are faster than, or can throw a softball further than 20 meters, they should not be in the softball throw. They need to be moved up to shot put or mini jab or some other field event. If your athlete in your qualifiers or in your practices is not quite at 20 meters, but is really close, I would highly consider moving your athlete and entering that athlete into one of the other events, because if adrenaline gets going and your athlete on the day of summer games is throwing further than 20 meters, or for 50-meter race is all of a sudden running 50 meters in less than 10 seconds for the day of the event, they are certainly subject to disqualification, and you don't want to have that. So if they're borderline in your practices, I would certainly consider and probably would suggest that you move your athletes into a more challenging event for them. Slide. Rules reminders. For field events, we mark, and you should do the same thing for your qualifiers and your practices. We record our times and distances, or distances to the next lowest centimeter. And I probably, the next slide we'll talk about for timing for running events. It's to the next highest 10th of a second. I'm going to state that incorrectly, but I think that's right. Regardless, for shot put, use the right weight shot, because we will be using the right weight shot at summer games, and your athletes should be practicing with the correct weight as well. Next slide. Mini jab, a couple rules. What we'll be judging for: over the shoulder throws, land tip first. When you're measuring, I think we have a slide further on, Ryan. When you're measuring for your vector for mini jab, it essentially should be 4 meters by 8 meters. For the softball throw, it should essentially be 3 meters by 2 meters. Okay, let's talk a little bit, go back for a sec, Ryan. Standing long jump must be a 2-foot takeoff. Both feet must be behind the takeoff line. And for both the standing long jump and the long jump, the distance is measured from the mark closest to the takeoff line. Okay, now just move forward after that. And we probably show real briefly the softball. I think it's 2.82 meters, essentially 3, and 2 meters across, or 2 point, whatever that is. My eyes, that's at 2.05. So essentially 3 by 2. And the mini jab, I don't know if we have a slide for that, is essentially 4 by 8. Move forward. Okay, long jump. The front of the toe board is 1 meter from the edge of the sand pit. We don't actually have a toe board. We put it on chalk. You should do the same thing. We don't want to be tripping our athletes as they run down the runway, but they must be able to get to the sand pit. If they can't get the 1 meter into the pit, it's a fault. They'll get 3 jumps at summer games. And again, the distance is marked from the spot closest to the takeoff line. High jump, We haven't had too many high jumpers other than pentathletes. We certainly would encourage you, if you have the ability to teach a proper high jump, to do that. We would love to have more high jumpers. It would keep Bill Wood busy for the entire day if we had more high jumpers. Second one, I guess, it is the most critical. No dives. It's an automatic DQ, even if you do that during warm-ups. Okay. Oh, Baltimore County also has high jumpers. Yay. Bill Wood will be excited to hear that. Okay. Moving forward. Standard track colors. I sort of take note of this, but don't memorize it. Tracks are different. Take note of wherever you're practicing, so that you know where your start lines are for the 100, for the 400, for the 800, and where you can turn in for the staggered for. But these colors, although they're sort of standard, they're often not followed. Next slide.
I would point out, if you're not familiar with track markings and such, during both the new coach session as well as the running your own meet, we will be going over and having lots of examples of stuff, at least from Google Earth, so you can help figure that out.
Okay, thank you, Mike. On this slide, an important point from Joyce. Thank you, Joyce. I suppose that someone else who helped run or who ran the high jump last year was someone who Joyce is vaguely familiar with, her son Adam. Anyway, thank you, Joyce, for pointing out that error on my part. For the track, if you notice where the stars are, that's typically where our starter, hopefully Scott will be back this year, running the track, and he generally adheres to this. Next slide. Okay. This is important because we will start every race with a gun start without exception. And to the best of your ability, you need to get your athletes ready to run their races with a gun start. I can't emphasize that enough. We won't have exceptions during summer games. So the more that they can practice and hear and be used to a gun start, the better it'll be on the day of competition. Next slide. Also want to be cognizant of our time this evening. Races up to and including 400, we'll use the 3-command start. Races longer than 400, 2-command start. Starting blocks can be used for races up to the 400. I'm not sure how many of our athletes will be using starting blocks, sometimes some St. Mary's athletes, but it's certainly, you're certainly permitted to do that. If you don't have starting blocks, I am almost 100% certain that Towson has starting blocks that we can use. I only have 5 or more slides of importance. Okay, I'm getting these little hints from Mike, and so I'm going to take him for his word. I only have 5 or more slides, so let's go, Ryan. Next slide. No, this one's not important. No, this is important. Athlete must race by himself. No pacing along the sidelines, no pacing inside the track, no pacing by your photographer, no pacing by someone in the stands. Just don't do it. Have your families don't do it. Your athlete is subject to a disqualification. If you have an athlete with a visual impairment, if you prefer to use a human aid, that's permissible. If you need to use a guide rope, let us know. We'll get that, have that available. Let us know in advance. That way we can get your athlete in a preferred lane on an outside lane. For races run in lanes and including a curve, your athlete must stay in his or her lane. Cutting into an inside lane is a disqualification. because essentially that shortens the distance for that event, for that athlete in that event. Races run entirely on a straight part of the track. Leaving your lane by itself is not necessarily a disqualification, but if he or she impedes another athlete, that will be a DQ, and it will be entirely the judgment of our track marshals out on the track that day. Next slide. Oops. Sorry. 400-meter race, a stagger start, run entirely in lanes. 800 stagger start. You must stay in lane around the first turn. Then you can cut in. Races longer than 800 meters will have a waterfall start, and you can cut in immediately. Next slide. This is important, especially, I'm sure the coaches know this, sometimes our families, and we need to remind our athletes, your place, the athlete's place is determined by the order of finishing, how they finish across the finish line. Move forward, Ryan, for your magical little elf who did that. And that's the way we do it at summer games. Our timers are picking places. If we get a discrepancy on the watch, we get a uniform agreement on the order of finish, because for medals, that's how we will award medals, is the order of finish. The finish is, or the athlete has completed the race when when his or her torso has crossed the finish line, not their feet, not their hands moving forward. For athletes in wheelchairs, that is the front wheels of their wheelchair. Okay, next slide. Relays, 4x1 is a stagger start. Teams must stay in lanes throughout. 4x2, also a staggered start, and also staying in lanes throughout. 4x4, stagger start. If we have more than 4 teams, we'll do a 3-turn stagger. First runners stay in lane, second runners stay in their lane around the first turn, and then can cut in after the break line. 4 teams or more, we have a 1-turn stagger. I'm not sure if this is a 2020 rule, as a new rule change, maybe somebody can help me with that. But 4 teams or more, first runners stay in lanes around the first turn, and the first runner can cut in at the break line after completing the first turn.
Ron, that's 4 teams or fewer, not 4 teams more.
4 teams or fewer, sorry.
Yeah, so if it's 4
Gotcha.
or less, 1-turn stagger. If it's more than 4, you go to a 3-turn.
I'm going to have to talk to my ophthalmologist, because that's not what I read the first time. But thank you, Mike.
Ron does not run the finish line, by the way. He runs the overall event. So.
That's right. We have competent people all over the track, and the incompetent people are at the control center, and that's me. Okay, next slide. Okay. Do I want to talk about this, or Mike or Ryan?
I can highlight this real quick. There's 3 slides here that kind of give you some pointers and such. Hopefully everyone at this time and these days are using an actual track for your trainings and such. There are some variations. I think the biggest thing on this one slide, as Ron has suggested or mentioned earlier, if you don't have a starter's gun, talk to your area and get a starter's gun. It is getting the athletes acclimated to that is probably the most advantageous thing that you can do in preparing your athletes who are running a race, and getting them, basically, even any athletes who maybe are scared at the start or beginning of the season, get acclimated to it. And I can't think of I can think of very, very few athletes who don't get desensitized to it going forward. On the next, it just gives you a couple pointers in terms of throwing events and such. Is really not, you can read it at your leisure. Again, hopefully everybody is using the standard equipment and such. And then the same thing on the last is just a couple pointers. So, but it's there, you'll get the deck, you'll get the slides, and you can utilize this. It'll also be posted on the coach resource page. So back to Ryan to bring us on home.
And before we get into the questions here, and again, thank you, Ron and Mike, for all your efforts with that there. I did not say that there was a a deadline for when you need to sign up for that master course. That will be April 1st. That was listed on there. I just wanted to clarify that. The other ones, there's no deadline. Sign up when it's convenient for you. But make sure if you're going to sign up for that master's course, you do so by April 1st. At this time, we will open it up for questions. I'm sure there are some. We don't have too many people on the call. Go ahead if you have one.
There's some
Ron?
questions in the chat.
Okay.
I think David Lang had one. On the 2 qualifier rule for summer games, does the athlete have to compete in their specific summer games events at 2 qualifiers?
Ron, I actually answered that in the chat itself.
Well, then I'm going to just shut up.
In the nutshell is no. You do need at least one competition score, but that can be an in-house. So I think we actually got every question in the chat at least answered. So any other questions, certainly.
Yeah, I didn't see any others coming through the chat or directly as well. Mike, you're
I would say that the 2 competition minimum, and again, that's what our current plans are. We will not increase it. If something really out of the ordinary happens, we may adjust it down, but that's a minimum. Please, your athletes benefit from as many competition experience as you possibly can offer them. So please do take advantage of every chance that you've got.
Mike, is Baltimore County going to have any all-comers events?
Baltimore County would love to do so, but the facility, we have some challenges in terms of hosting that at the facility. What I would say is that we would be more than happy to co-host and take on the ownership of operating an event if someone else can host, and then Joyce can add to that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I actually had that question and I sent that into McDonough the other day. We have a new person we're working with.
Oh, okay.
So I haven't gotten a no yet. I'm waiting till the contract is signed and everything is finished, and then I will ask a little bit more, but I'm trying to do one step at a time. So it would be great if we could.
Yeah, we would absolutely love to do it. It's one of the most enjoyable things for us and our athletes to host stuff.
We'll definitely let, and Don, I'll let you know personally if we do it, but we'll get that done as soon as we can if we get the go ahead.
Okay, because the one thing is going to be a little tricky is I don't know of all areas. I know we're not going to have a spring games, a normal school spring games, just because of the timing and everything. But we'll probably do something, an in-house one that certainly can have other teams come in. But I know a lot of people are in the same boat, so it might be tricky.
Yeah, but I personally would be more than happy to assist any county that wants to host one, and have equipment, and we'll travel with it. So
Yeah, Mike, Joyce, we are having our spring games in Carroll County in April. We might be amenable to partnering with you because we have a great relationship with our school, with the area director or the athletic director there. We might be able to use the school if you guys would be interested. Do you want to check?
that would be
Kathy,
great.
I'll reach out to you later, Kathy. Would it be available on a weekend? Because usually you guys do them during the week.
Well, only if it's during the school season, but if we're going to do like mid-May, late May.
Okay. I'll touch base with you later separately.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds
that's a
good.
very nice facility. I was out there with the Carroll Montgomery joint meet out there last spring. It was really, really nice.
I'll get in touch, Kathy. Thanks.
Great.
Question. Yeah, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying. We only need one qualifier to make it to the state games, or is it still two?
So the question that David had asked in there, so everyone, barring some unforeseen situation, every athlete needs to go to 2 competitions and do 2. His question was, because he has He coaches Montgomery County, and I know that you have a lot of longer distance runners and such. His question was, do they have to do every one of their events at 2 meets? And the reality is, as much as that would be ideal and would be fantastic to do that, and Don will run into, and Baltimore County may run into the same thing with the high jumpers and such. It's just not, they aren't offered at enough meets for that. So if they, but we do need a competition score. So the one competition score is strictly if that event is not offered at numerous, but they do need to go to 2 meets. Good question. Thank you for, I'm sorry we didn't clarify that before.
And
Can I
just,
try?
go ahead, Pam.
Can I try this again? Question for Mike or any of you gentlemen. With athletics, it's not required. It's not required to have vaccine, correct?
To compete in athletics, it is not required to be vaccinated. However, if you are going to stay overnight, say at summer games, which would probably be the case for most of your folks, in either housing that we provide or housing that Special Olympics, including your area, coordinates or arranges for them, they must be vaccinated. If they go and set up their own housing on their own, mom and dad or the athlete, if they're independent, books a hotel on their own, that's not Special Olympics coordinated. That's not an issue, but anything housing wise that we either provide or arrange for them, they must be vaccinated at this point in time. And we don't anticipate that changing at all.
So, but
yeah,
to compete at state level, you don't have to be.
For track and field and for bocce, that is correct. You do not have to come to step on the track, to run your races, to put your shots and throw your jabs and whatever. You do not need to be. It's for track and
Housing.
field, strictly the overnight issue
Yes.
that you need to factor in at state games. As was noted otherwise, some of the competitions, such as the Naval Academy, will be likely having a vaccination requirement. And so you need to know what that is. And I'm sure, Ryan, if that's not already one of the questions on the sanctioning form, we'll need to edit that real quick. And Steve, we can get that and get that posted so folks have that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no, it's a lot to absorb, and it varies by sport and so on. So I appreciate your.
I just want to make sure I get it correct.
Yep.
And while we're on the topic of sanction forms, I just got a message from Shelley Bagaski, and they will be having a qualifier at the Landon School this year. So we do have a few that we've been talking about here. So hopefully we'll get those forms in and get them posted to everybody here shortly.
Good.
Any other questions?
One other note also, I'm sorry, with those competitions, keep in mind also, in addition to whether they have to be vaccinated or not, based on the facility, there may be a maximum number of participants too. So it's not necessarily the case that everybody can go to every event. Different facilities have different requirements. It could also be that there's a cap that needs to be placed on, like, for example, when Baltimore County, we really miss doing it, when we used to host all-comers meets, we could host 200 or so competitors in about 5 hours, something like that. But the amount of time that the facility is available can have a big factor in it as well. So just don't assume just because an event is being offered that everybody and anybody can go to it. You need to work that out with that host. So, and most will accommodate to the extent that they can handle everybody that'll fit. But sometimes it's just not going to be enough space for every single person who would like to be there.
Oh, the clicker worked for the final slide. Thank you all very much for being on tonight. Ran just a few minutes late, but I hope this was very helpful for you. As always, I look forward to working with you again this year. Let's have a great year. I know our athletes are really looking forward to summer games and even the stuff outside of the sport aspect that the games offer. So if you need anything or I could be of help to you at all, please don't hesitate reaching out. Again, you will have all this content tomorrow, including the recording and the slide deck for your reference. And let's have a great year. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Hey, Ryan, real quick.
Yes, Don. Oh, almost left. Go ahead.
If you need any assistance for the